And we are live in the Storycraft Cafe. I am your host, Hank Garner. I am very fortunate to have one of my friends here with me, Glen Erik Hamilton, one of my favorite authors on the earth. And we've had plenty of chances to catch up in the past. And when we started doing this podcast for the Storycraft Cafe, I knew that Glen was one of the people that we had to get on. Such an amazing story and amazing stories that he continues to put out. I know you're going to love his work as much as I do. Glenn, welcome to the Storycraft Cafe. Thanks for joining me.
Absolutely, Hank. So great to talk to you again.
You too. Y- Glenn, this has been a fun project to kind of spin up out of a new venture with the writers community that we're working on here. And I know that you're very big on community. Um, what does what does your writers community look like, and how has it changed over publishing 6 books?
Sure. Yeah, it's it's interesting because community is one of the first things when I went to my first convention when I was actively writing. Um, it was Thriller Fest in 2013, and between that and BoucherCon and Left Coast Crime, all in that first year, the amount of warm welcome and encouragement and advice I received was just extraordinary. It was phenomenal. Um, it was not only great for me personally, but it was also a good object lesson in saying, okay, this is a community that encourages one another, that gives back, that gets involved, things of that nature. And so, as within a few years, I was working with the Sisters in Crime LA board as their treasurer. I served as president of the Mystery Writers of America for 2 years for Southern California. Now I'm back in Seattle, having moved back last year, and I'm meeting the people here and getting involved with the community here. But the lesson remains the same. It's all about really comparing notes, comparing miseries. Misery loves company.
Right.
The hard, lonely work of writing, because usually it's just one person sitting there banging their
Right.
head on the keyboard until words come out. And getting a chance to talk to other people about that, talk about their experiences, share notes, share advice. It's all that's why we do it. It's such a relief now to be, after 2 years, to be back at conventions in person.
Right.
Yeah, and I can
Well,
say more about that later, but
yeah, well, I think that's something that we don't uh, talk enough about. Writing is such a solitary endeavor. It's you sitting at the keyboard by yourself for a lot of the process. It's just you
Mhm.
and the story, and I think
and and
a
and
lot
the sacrifices that come with that too. Like
exactly.
like I have lists of pop culture that I'm like, yeah, I want to watch the new season of X, but I'm not going to get to the new season of X until I get done with
Right.
this draft, which is in some months.
Yeah.
So
Right.
inevitably we're a year to 2 year behind anything that's new coming
Well,
out.
and I think that a lot of new writers don't even realize that community is a thing that you can strive for. They just think, writing is just a lonely endeavor. It's just you bleeding at the keyboard, and community is something that you absolutely can strive for and still maintain um, your private art. That
Yeah.
writing tends to be. You can be both, and I have no idea why we began on that tangent, but I guess it
Well,
needed to be said.
yeah, and it's interesting that you say that about the young writer, because one of the things that the communities, that the organizations like Sisters in Crime and
Yeah,
Mystery Writers of America are doing is trying to get younger people engaged and involved,
right,
because we have a generation or so that's grown up with community as a virtual thing, not a bad thing, just a different
right.
thing.
Just a
Right.
different thing.
Right.
Right.
So if the organizations are to survive and thrive, they need to meet them on that level, where they live, where they are, but
Yeah,
also encourage them to come out and meet people in person too, because there's so much to be gained from that as well.
right. So Glenn, Uh, a fun question that I've been asking people as we start some of these interviews is, what is a piece of writing advice that you received, either good or bad? Maybe it's something that you've held on to, and you're like, "Thank God I got this advice because it's helped me in some way," or maybe it's so tragically terrible that it's laughable.
I can think of two, and I'll keep
Okay,
them brief. Um, the first one is you hear about kill your darlings, right?
right,
And about if you're too wedded to something and it's just not working for the story, you take it out.
right.
Always remember that in this wonderful world of cut and paste that we live in, that can come up in a later work, or that can be
True.
used elsewhere. Or if you really like that analogy or metaphor and it doesn't work here, it might work somewhere else. And that's a relief when you've got to cut that thing that you dearly love but isn't working for you along the
So
way.
do you physically cut it and, like, paste it into another
Yep.
document? You have,
Yep. And I'll
like,
give it a
things
very
that you've collected?
specific name, like, this is description of forest thicket from second draft of this work along the way, so that every once in a while I can look through that list and go, huh, that might still be useful somewhere, right?
That's a
On the way.
fantastic
That's
idea.
that's that's handy, when I remember to do it. The other great advice I got is, whatever your point of view character is feeling is what the reader is likely to feel. Don't ever have them be bored. Don't ever have
Ooh,
them killing time.
okay.
That just bear in mind how empathetic the reader is to whatever's going on in the story.
Right.
And that's always a good rule. Another good rule is whatever I'm feeling when I'm writing it is probably what is coming across on the page, right? So
Right.
if I'm just hacking my way through the underbrush of a scene and it's kind of drudgery, well, the scene is probably drudgery too, and I need to
Yeah.
rethink it.
Great advice. You mentioned a minute ago that you guys have moved back to Seattle, which brings up the topic. You're originally from Seattle, right?
Yes,
And you grew up on a sailboat?
yes,
Yes.
yes.
I love to hear about how a sense of place, affects people. If you're from a certain region, how does that come out in your writing, or how does that affect your writing? But if you're from a sailboat, uh, what does that mean for how you see story and how you see character development? What does that do for you in your creative life?
It's interesting because if you grow up on a boat and you take the boat out with relative frequency, your definition of getting around town is a little different, right?
Yes.
You literally see the city from different angles, right?
Right.
So there's still a part of my brain that thinks about going from the east side, where the marina we had for most of my formative years was, thinks about going from the east side to Seattle as the process of going through Lake Washington to the locks and going into Lake Union and then going out on the Sound and going through the locks. That is as much a freeway in my head as the freeways going across the bridges.
Wow.
And so and there's views of the city stuck in my head from
Yeah.
being a kid on the water all the time. But it's also a way of noticing how the city moves, and the fact that I don't think if you are living on land for your whole life, you notice just how many ships come in and out of Seattle. We
Mhm.
are the largest shipping port north of Long Beach, I think it is, and
Wow.
certainly the largest one in this region of the United States. That's a whole lot of freight
Yeah.
coming in and out of the city constantly, not even
Right.
counting air freight, right? And there's entire sections of the cities dedicated to that most people never really see except to drive past and go, oh, there's Harbor Island, right? Or there's the Duwamish. Yeah.
Right. Well, you are a father,
Mhm.
now, and you live in a house, I presume, in Seattle. You don't live on a sailboat that I know of.
No,
Um,
no.
do, do you does your idea of home, is it affected by the way that you were raised, as and contrasted with your family life now, the way that you raise your kids? Does that do you see a contrast, a difference?
There's a Far Side cartoon that I've always loved, and it shows two kids, two little boys sneaking out of a circus tent,
Okay.
and it says, ironically, the children of Barnum and Bailey ran away from the circus to join corporate America. So there's a little bit of truth to that, in
Yeah.
that, my parents were the adventurous ones who tried, unusual things and unusual tacks. Not that I don't, but they were the ones who wanted to live aboard along the way. Whereas
Right.
I've worked in large corporations for most of my career, most of my day job career, and have lived on land in apartments and houses for most of my life as well. That said, I think there's a certain amount of outsiderness that
Yeah.
comes from that. People who live aboard boats tend to think of themselves, rightly or wrongly, as apart. They're usually living aboard the boats for a reason.
Yeah.
And they like to have that distance a little bit.
Yeah.
And it encourages a very, not a scant view of the rest of society, but sort of like a let's look at this with some neutrality rather than just buying into what's coming along, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Not that it doesn't have its own biases, but there is
Right.
there is that sense. And you talked about community. The live aboard community is a very real thing too, and the
Right.
cruising community, people who travel up and down the Pacific or Baja California, along the way. There's and share community even more now than ever, because they can stay in touch virtually,
Yeah.
right? And so it's a very real outsider view of things that I think has lent itself nicely to writing people who also think of themselves as outside normal society.
Well, and that's where I was going with that, is you are now 6 books into a series with a character named Van Shaw, that we've grown to love as you've written this series. But Van is a bit of an outsider character, and
Oh, absolutely.
um,
Yeah.
and I think you told me one time, and I'm probably gonna butcher this, but, correct me. I think you said, "Van is me with the guardrails taken off."
Yes. Yeah, I think that's pretty accurate. Obviously there's wish fulfillment that comes with any
Of
fictional
course.
character, right? They're
Of
glibber,
course.
they're faster, they're tougher, they're all of this
Yeah.
that comes with it. But in terms of attitude and what I might like to do in situations, rather than
Right.
what my common sense tells me not to do, or caution tells me not to do, yeah, there's a lot of that. It's like, just like, okay, it's frequent that I go into a situation that Van is in, going, all right, what would I like to do in this situation as opposed to what I would do, right?
Right.
And I think the readers jibe with that too, right? That's why it's escapist fare, is because we get to see people struggle with things we don't have to struggle with, be victorious in ways that we might not get to be victorious, and
Right.
all of that stuff. But Van is definitely an outsider himself, and struggles with that. There's a part of him that's very much a family man. He's created an ersatz family of his own. He's got close friends. He's not a lone wolf. He's very much a joiner, but he's a joiner on his own terms, but also on their terms as well. And he tends to attract other weirdos who fit that mold.
When you first, conceived of Van, did you see him as being a series character, as someone that you could carry out over a number of books? And, maybe that's an unfair question from the vantage point that you are now, because we don't always have the benefit of seeing that that anyone's going to care about this character and his adventures, enough
Right.
to carry it out, So we do have the unique, you know, point of there are 6 books now. People obviously care about him. But could you envision that this character had a future like this?
About the first half of the first draft of the book that
Okay.
became Past Crimes, before I jettisoned subplots that weren't working, etc. Um, the Shaw character, who was not named Shaw at the time, was a lot more of a neo noir. Was a lot darker. He was more of a pure criminal, not completely amoral, but certainly a criminal.
Mm-hmm.
And it was was a lot darker in tone of the book. And I realized, number one, it was sort of the heyday of, well, it passed the heyday of the anti-heroes on television in the late 90s,
Yeah.
2000 aughts renaissance of that. So we were already coming out of that. But number one, I realized I didn't want to write that character. It was more interesting to write a character who was struggling to do the right thing in bad circumstances. And I wanted to make more of a hero, an audience surrogate for the character itself. And then as the story progressed, I realized I was thinking about the characters as characters that I would revisit.
Right.
If things took off. I wanted to come back and see what Addie Proctor and Willard and other Ken Corcoran and other strange folk that we met in the first book were going to be doing, and how they were going to grow, and how Van was going to grow. Because in the first book, he's only 28 years old. He's had a very full life after being raised as a professional criminal and then escaping into the military and serving there for many years. But he's only 28 years old. He's got a lot of growing to do. He's got a lot of things to learn, and I wanted to learn those. I wanted to have him get older and do that.
One of my favorite genres of books is are heist thrillers or heist mysteries, or the pulling off this great caper, and a lot of times that takes some moral ambiguity,
Mm-hmm.
to kind of put it nicely. What was it about this character that originally intrigued you? And was there because he was raised a criminal, and was there sort of some of that element to the character?
Uh, yes, if I understand your question correctly, I adore heist in caper movies.
Yeah.
They're a lot of fun, and there's been so many of them that they're surprisingly hard to do well
Right.
without really stretching the bounds of credulity. That's a problem
Right.
that con artist movies have too. It's like there's
Sure.
so many twists. It's like, okay, at a certain point, nobody could
Yeah.
have reasonably predicted any of this.
Right.
But a good heist thriller is great. And I read a wonderful description of it recently in Crime Reads, in an article in Crime Reads on heists. It might have been Olivia Ritigliano, who's one of their regular writers. I apologize if it wasn't one of hers. But it described the heist thriller as competency porn. And I adore that description, because that's exactly what it is. It's seeing people who are expert at doing particular things, executing perfectly or almost perfectly. Right. And that is a terrific description. And that's what I like to bring to the thefts, that whenever Van has to steal something, is forced to steal something, forced to break into something, I want to show secrets or make up secrets or whatever that the reader will really love. But there's got to be some twist there too. Either his objective is not what he thought it was, or it's not what the reader thought he was doing, or something else, right? To give that extra spin on it that makes it more than just, okay, everything went to plan, great, clap, clap,
yeah.
clap. Right?
You wrote the first, I think it was 5 books in the series, and in the first person perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And the 6th book, your newest one, I'm assuming there's going to be a new one out in a few months. So we say newest, but we haven't really talked about this yet. But Anyway, the latest book
Yeah.
switches to the third person perspective.
Yes.
Um, you were very firmly entrenched in a particular way that you wrote these books, and I would assume, I'm making a lot of assumptions here, that the beginning of a new Shaw book uh, probably felt very familiar. And when you're writing a series character, the world building, for lack of a better term, a lot of that stuff is done for you because they're existing
Yeah,
characters,
that
and
is the
you know,
advantage of a series,
yeah,
definitely.
a lot of
Yeah.
the rules are already
Mhm.
set. Um, but then you shook it up. You have all these established things that make it easy to get into a story. I know you have to, dream up of new adventures for them to go through, but then you took all that familiarity away and set yourself a new challenge in an existing world. Talk about that for just a minute.
Bravado and foolishness, Hank. Pure bravado and foolishness. Um, it's there's there's specific reasons for that. When COVID hit, I had not started really working on Island of Thieves yet. I was finishing up the fifth book, Dangerous Breed. And COVID, as you might recall, hit
Never heard of it.
Seattle and the Seattle area kind of first in the
Yes.
continental North America, right?
Yes.
And we didn't know what it meant then. All we knew is that everything shut down. There are refrigerated trucks to hold the bodies they assume are coming. There is a
Mm,
stadium that they have turned into a triage ward because the hospitals can't handle it. It was terrifying. There are
right.
videos of empty freeways and empty streets, and you know, uh, and and we were in LA still at that point. We hadn't moved back yet, and I thought I gotta. I was just stuck, and I thought I got to address this somehow. I got to write this, and so I wrote a short story because Van's a Seattle guy. It's impossible
Yeah.
that I can ignore this happening. And so I wrote a short story called Essential Business, which is a phrase you might remember from the early days of the
Mhm.
pandemic.
Yep.
And Essential Business was just something I wrote for myself. And I wrote it specifically in third person to give just a different take on it than the average Van adventure, but also to try it out. And the publisher liked it and published it with the mass market edition of Dangerous Breed when that came out. So that's available if readers want to read it. Um, the but it also gave me a chance to work in the third person and try that out for 30 or so pages, and I liked it. And I had been thinking about third person for a while because, to back up and talk craft for a second, of course, if you're first person, that's the standard mystery structure, right? We're
Right.
learning things as the detective learns them. We only know what the detective knows,
Mhm.
and we're figuring things out in that real time. The third person structure allows for what is more of a thriller structure, where we're breaking away from the protagonist, the point of view character. We're setting up obstacles and dangers that individual doesn't know about, but they're about to walk into in order to build suspense,
Right.
right? In order to build that. And I wanted to put Van in a thriller instead of a mystery, right? I mean, they're
Mm.
all action thrillers, they're all things, but in terms of structure, I wanted to do that. And also, after 5 books of seeing the world through Van's eyes, I was very curious what he looked like through other people's eyes, right? When they
That's
look
a
at
great
him,
point.
what do they think, right? Do they see him as
Right.
he sees himself? Do they make bad assumptions about who he is and what his intentions are? Those were interesting things. So all of these things combined, and so when I started Island of Thieves, I knew, okay, I'm going to do this. Some of it close third from Van's point
Mhm.
of view, but occasionally I'm going to break away and I'm gonna talk about other characters, and starts right with the prologue with a man who's having a very bad day in New Orleans, um, and so it's a little different, but it did allow me to set up that thing. It ended up being the longest book I've written by quite a bit.
Right.
Because as I'm breaking away from Van, of course, those are extra pages that I'm just sort of adding in that are moving the story forward, but it tends to add to the bulk of a book,
Yeah.
right? It's not as streamlined. But I was delighted to do it. And I write best when I'm a little scared anyway. So trying new things is a good thing,
Yeah.
right? And so so that was very useful. I was glad I made the jump. The example that told me it could be done is Lee Child's Reacher novels, which
Right.
started out first person,
Hmm.
eventually went into alternating. He was alternating every book, as I understand it, going first person, third person, first person, third person,
Right.
for exactly that reason, so that he could mess with the structure whenever as he wanted to. And now I think the last couple I've read have been exclusively third person. So I don't know if
Yeah.
he's going to go back to first person ever, or
Well,
or,
and
or
his
Ben
brother
Andrew
Andrew
Child. Andrew
coming on
Child will, yeah.
and writing those, I think, has contributed some to that
Yeah.
because they have a different perspective on Reacher, as anyone naturally would.
Right.
But as you went to third person and saw how other characters in the book saw Van, did that change how you thought about Van? Did you, as the writer, learn things about him because other characters did?
That's a very good question. Yes, a little bit. And the book gets into it a little bit. Is Van's pretty class conscious. He's got a lot of blue collar pride,
Yeah.
right? And he's been brought up to think of rich people as marks, right? They're the ones with the money, so they're the ones
Right.
you steal from,
Right.
right? And to also tend to think of them as corrupt, right? You don't get rich
Mhm.
without being corrupt, right?
Right.
Or at least on a large scale, right?
Yeah.
And yes, there's a germ of truth to that sometimes,
Yeah.
in some cases, but certainly not always. But Van certainly has those prejudices accordingly, and tends to dress and act to provoke in those senses, right?
Mm.
He likes
Right.
needling people more than necessarily he would admit, but others like Addie will call him on it. It's like, it's no wonder you made a bad impression. You were trying to make a bad impression,
Right.
right? Yeah.
Right. So how are you feeling about Van after 6 books? I'm assuming the seventh book
Mhm.
is coming, fairly soon
The
ish.
seventh book is coming.
Yeah.
I actually, not to jump ahead too much, but I actually have about the first third of a standalone submitted to my publisher now, and
Interesting.
I'm hopeful that will get, well, it's going to get completed because I'm
Yeah.
2/3 of the way through writing it now. I'm definitely going to write it. I'll finish writing it.
Yeah.
That may be the next thing that comes out.
Okay.
I have a strong idea for Van number 7, and I'm eager to get to work on that. But that's often the case with me, is that about 2/3 of the way through, when I'm struggling most with the current book, that's of
Yeah.
course when I get excited about the next one, and my brain
Of
wants to
course.
distract me and run away and work on that. So I
Yeah.
just have to be an adult and go, no, finish your
Yeah.
vegetables, and
Get
then you
the
can, yeah,
get the
yeah,
work done.
yeah,
Get the
get the
work
work
done.
done. And and it'll come back around where the closer I get to finishing the current book, the more excited I'll be about it, and then I'll be excited to get into rewrites and
Yeah.
everything else. But you will see Van 7. It just may be after the next book comes out. So
Gotcha. Um, w- Writing a standalone, was that something that had been that you'd been thinking about for a while?
mhm.
Was it time to take a break from Van? What was the thought process that went into shaking up the schedule a bit?
Yeah, a little of both. I took a swing at a standalone after the third Van book, and I liked the character. I liked the backstory. I couldn't quite get the current mystery to gel in the way I wanted to. But it's
Yeah.
also evergreen, so I can come back to it. And then, as it happens, I got very excited about the idea I had for Van number 4, Mercy River, and went, "Ooh, I like that. Let me go write that instead." Well, and
Yeah.
rather than bang my head against this other book for a year. Um, but this at this point, I had an idea for a different story, And with the move back to the Northwest, and also having just finished up the longest van to date, I did feel like I wanted to take a short break from van
Mm-hmm.
and write a character who cannot solve things by picking locks or punching somebody in the face or things of that nature, right? Let's put
Right.
somebody who's more of an every person and have them in trouble
Yeah.
and in dire situations and see what happens with that. And so I got very interested in that, and I had the concept that I liked a lot, and my agent also liked it a lot. And so we worked on the first third, as I said, of the book for quite a while until that was ready to give to the publisher. And now I'm 100 or so pages beyond that, and looking towards Act 3 and finishing that up.
Gotcha. Glenn, you are one of the most successful bivocational authors that I know of. You are a very successful writer, yet you still maintain a day job.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and I really want to talk to you about kind of work-life balance and
Yeah.
work-life balance because you have two full-time jobs. You have one that you go to every day, and then you're a full-time writer, and you have a family, and you have
Mm-hmm.
a private life that you still maintain. Um, in the beginning, when people are first writing and hopefully getting published and all of that, writing tends to um, weigh very heavily on them and some of the decisions that they make, because that's something you're really trying to get off the ground, and putting a lot of time and effort into.
Yes.
6 books later, do you still hold that balance in the same, are the scales still balanced the same for you? And how do you determine kind of what gets, the majority of your attention at any given time?
Yeah, it's funny. I have always struggled with setting a regular writing schedule simply because my life doesn't always allow for a regular schedule,
Right.
right? And so, I don't necessarily get the same hours available every day to write. Um, the Weirdly enough, the pandemic and working from home has actually made time scheduling a little easier. It hasn't necessarily made writing any easier, but it's made
Yeah.
time scheduling a little easier. Um, but it's probably the I don't know if it's heartening advice or disheartening advice,
Hmm.
but it can continue to be a struggle in terms of finding balance, and that's okay. One of the advantages of being 6 books into the series, actually almost 7 now, into writing books, is I don't panic as much if I need to take a break for a week, or if we're traveling for a week and the writing time just isn't there, on the way. I will say I have some advantages in that my family is extremely supportive. In those times when I'm on deadline, where I'm working the day job for 8 hours and then I'm writing for 5 hours, and then I come home and I eat what the food they've prepared for me is, and I sleep and I get up and I do it again.
Yeah.
Um, that's a tremendous help. And it does help that our daughter is older now, has her own things going on,
Yeah.
and that's useful too. The other advantage I have is that when the writing career started to take off, I was able to go from the management track I had in my day job back to a more individual role and say, you know what, maybe I don't need to be working 60 hours a week, 70 hours a week. Not if I'm thinking of writing as my actual career. Maybe this is just my job. And fortunately, I work in a place where just having a job is okay, right? It's not
Yeah.
one of those companies where if you're not moving up, you're out, right? And
Right.
that's a good thing too. And I think, honestly, I think a lot of companies could learn from that. Is like,
Yeah.
if somebody's good at their job and they enjoy doing their job, why is it necessary that they have to move out of that job, right? The Peter
Right.
principle. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, and and some people get promoted out of the place where they were supposed to be all
Right.
along. And
The Peter principle that I just mentioned is people are
yeah,
promoted to the point of incompetence. Right.
exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly. One thing that I don't think people talk about enough is that there's always this goal. I'm going to be good enough at writing and publishing that I can then um, quit this other job and just do this. And then some people get so insulated from the outside world when they become full-time writers that they lose the connection that
Uh,
that kept them grounded, that gave them, a window into the world that they could then report on, as writers. Do
yeah.
you feel like that having this other outlet, feeds the writer soul in a way?
It definitely does. Now, the advantage is it's forcing me to think about new things, meet other
Yeah.
people, that sort of thing that aren't necessarily related to the writing world itself. Um, we talked about the loneliness of writing, and I
Mhm.
think my personality has some advantage there because whenever I've taken those Myers-Briggs tests and personality tests, I'm right on that line between introvert and extrovert.
Mm.
So I will
Yeah.
get a bunch of energy from people, and then I have to go away and use it before I explode, right? And
Right.
chill out. So conventions are great. I'll get a bunch of energy at conventions, and then I got to go away.
Yeah.
But conversely, if I'm alone too much, I get disheartened and stuff. I need to be around other people. So that's very useful in the writing thing. So were I to, at the point at which I leave my day job, whether it's because writing becomes the full-time thing or I retire, whatever happens, right?
Mhm.
At the point at which that happens, I will get involved with other things just because it's my nature. And I'll be
Yeah.
doing volunteer work and I'll be doing other things that will be not writing that
Yeah.
bring that sort of stuff in. I think if I were a pure introvert, that would be tougher
Yeah.
because you do got to get out there and mesh a little bit in order to and struggle a little bit in order to bring that new grist into the mill as you might say.
Right. Right. What things are currently, feeding you? Where do you draw inspiration from these days?
Well, of course, we're only 8 or 9 months into living in the new city of in our new old city of Seattle. All the street names are the same, but everything on the streets has changed.
Right.
So that's so it's brand new, and that's been very inspiring. That's part of the reason I'm so excited to write the next van is because it's like, oh, look at this, look at all this cool stuff in the city that we can talk about and use, and where I can
Yeah.
set scenes and things like that. Um, so that's a lot of inspiration. Also, as we're looking at the city and its struggles and politics closer in, that's pretty fascinating too. Just looking at the times each day, seeing what's going on, talking to people that we meet, making new friends, making new acquaintances around, and seeing how they think of Seattle because some of them are natives and some of them are not. I'm getting their perspectives on the city as well, and that's pretty darn fascinating.
Yeah. Well, the latest Van Shaw mystery is Island of Thebes. Share the elevator pitch for that book. If people are not familiar with the Van Shaw series, this is the latest one. And let me ask you this: would you recommend people start at the beginning, or can they pick any Van Shaw book as an on ramp?
Yeah, the series is designed so that readers can pick anyone in the series and quickly understand who Van is and what he does, and who the people are close to him in his life, right?
Yeah,
Without belaboring a lot of backstory.
right.
It's designed to be able to pick up. That said, if folks start from the beginning, there are Easter eggs or fun little callbacks that we'll
Mm,
have occasionally to previous books, like where Van picked up his car, or
right.
how he came to meet this person, right? That just add to the richness, I think, of reading. Um, and so the series is getting to a point where I had a reader actually ask if I would add more introduction to characters when they appear, so that the reader could be better reminded of who they were from past novels along the way. And I took that to heart and thought, okay, I need to look at that when I write the next one and make sure that I'm grounding the reader effectively in who these people are, because they're so close to me and they're so close to my editor. They don't need reminders, and maybe more than a sentence or two is what we need. So sorry, I got off track there. But in looking at Island of Thieves, Van gets what he thinks might be the ideal job for him as a guy who knows security systems, understands how the way thieves work, and so forth. Right. He gets a possible gig as a security consultant for a billionaire who's new on the scene in the Northwest, an international business magnate, who runs a multinational corporation, and that magnate has bought an island in the San Juans, and some of the islands in the San Juans are in fact privately owned. And his vision for this island is it's going to be a Camp David West. It will be a place where high business mucky mucks and political leaders come and arrange deals, but it's also his personal enclave. It's where he and his family are going to get away. And this enclave is about to basically have its maiden voyage with a deal that could make or break the next generation for his corporation. And Van has been brought on to protect the private art gallery for reasons too lengthy to go into, while this conference essentially is going on, while this meeting is going on. Because it's a thriller, things don't go to plan.
Of course.
No shock there, right? Van finds himself stumbling across a body on the beach, quickly becomes a person of interest, if not the prime suspect in the individual's death. And things just keep getting worse from there. So,
and hilarity ensues.
Right? Ooga horns and clown shoes, as far as the eye can see. Yeah.
Well, Glen, if people are just discovering you and want to dig into all the great stuff that you do, where can they connect with you online?
Absolutely. Best way is my website, which I do a reasonable job of keeping up along the way, is glenerickhamilton.com. You can find me on Facebook under my full name. You can find me on Twitter at Glen Erik H, to keep it short. And I'm only moderately active on social media, but what I really love is if readers shoot me an email. The contact information's on the website, but it's glen@glenerickhamilton.com. I've been posting my email in my bio and author notes in the last book or two. And I've really seen an uptick in conversations with readers who really like the series and stuff. Another great way to get involved if folks like the series, and I like to encourage this not just for my own books, but for any books that you like, is leave reviews. Go to Goodreads, go to Amazon, just a sentence or two. Doesn't have to be a lot, but leave a review of the books that you like, because publishers really do look at those. And if the new book is getting more reviews than the last book, always a good thing for any author, right? That tells the publisher that readers are out there, they're engaged, they care enough to be looking forward to the next one in the series.
Well, and lots of readers read reviews,
Absolutely.
not only publishers, but, usually I'll go look at a book and I'll look at the 1-star reviews and I kind of throw those away. And then the 5-star reviews, you throw about half of those away. And those 4-star reviews, that's where a lot of the truth comes from. So yeah, leave reviews and tell people what you think about it. That's
I actually have a reminder on my own calendar once a month to say what have I read, and go and leave the reviews for that. Right.
That's a great idea.
Just take that half hour or an hour once a month and go, okay, what have I read recently? Okay, go give them some kudos for that. So
fantastic idea. We will send everyone to see you and to pick up their copy of Island of Thieves and to get into the Van Shaw series. Glen, always a pleasure to catch up. Let's do it again soon.
Absolutely, Hank. Lovely to talk to you.